Every generation has one Western that refuses to fade. For a lot of movie fans, that film is Tombstone. The mustaches, the walk down the street before the gunfight at the OK Corral, the endlessly quoted lines. It all feels inevitable, like it could only have been made exactly the way it was made. But that feeling is an illusion. Tombstone almost didn't survive its own production. And buried inside that near collapse is a story that most fans have never fully connected. A story that centers not on Kurt Russell or Val Kilmer, but on the tall, gravel-voiced actor who played Virgil Earp, Sam Elliott. Elliott wasn't just an actor collecting a paycheck on that dusty Arizona set. He understood something about how Tombstone was actually being made and who was actually making the decisions behind the camera that the public wouldn't learn for more than a decade. And once you know what he was fighting to protect while the cameras rolled, you'll never watch this movie the same way again. To understand why Sam Elliott's stand mattered, you have to go back to 1993, a moment when the Western as a genre was considered commercially dead. Studios had mostly abandoned it. Audiences, the thinking went, wanted superheroes and blockbusters, not dusty frontier towns and six-shooters. Into that unfriendly climate walked a screenwriter named Kevin Jarre, fresh off writing the acclaimed Civil War drama Glory. Jarre had a passion project, a sprawling, meticulously researched script about Wyatt Earp, his brothers, and the gunfight that made them famous. What Jarre wrote wasn't a typical shoot-'em-up. It was dense with historical detail, subplots, and character work. It was ambitious enough and good enough that it attracted an extraordinary cast almost overnight. Kurt Russell as Wyatt Earp, Val Kilmer as Doc Holliday, Sam Elliott as Virgil Earp, Bill Paxton as Morgan Earp, along with Powers Booth, Michael Biehn, Stephen Lang, and Billy Bob Thornton in supporting roles. Even the legendary Robert Mitchum was brought in to narrate. Here's the detail that most casual fans miss entirely. Jarre wasn't hired only to write Tombstone. He was set to direct it. This was supposed to be his directorial debut, his chance to bring his own vision of the Old West to the screen exactly as he'd imagined it on the page. Jarre's commitment to authenticity bordered on obsession. He insisted every actor grow and style a real period mustache, curled at the ends in the fashion of the 1880s, and the cast wore theirs like badges of honor. It wasn't vanity. It was buy-in. The actors believed they weren't just making another cowboy movie. They believed they were making the definitive telling of the Earp story, and Jarre's script was the reason why. Unfortunately, believing in a vision and being able to execute it under the brutal pressure of a real production schedule are two very different things. Jarre reportedly wanted to shoot in the sweeping, patient style of John Ford, composing wide, painterly frames. But a large-scale period Western, with horses, crowds, choreographed gunfights, and a massive ensemble cast, doesn't leave much room for patience. Jarre fell behind almost immediately. The days grew longer, the footage grew thinner, and the budget kept bleeding. Barely a month into filming, producer Andy Vajna made the call and fired him. That should have been the end of Tombstone, a film with no director, half its footage shot, a nervous cast, and a clock that wouldn't stop ticking. Instead, what happened next became one of the strangest, most closely guarded secrets in modern Hollywood history, and Sam Elliott was standing right in the middle of it. When Jarre was let go, the studio brought in George P. Cosmatos, a filmmaker known for high-octane action movies like Rambo, First Blood Part 2, and Cobra. For years, the official record was simple. Cosmatos directed Tombstone. His name sat in the credits. Film historians and casual fans alike accepted it without question. It wasn't the whole truth. Years later, Kurt Russell revealed what had actually happened on that set, and it remains one of the most jaw-dropping behind-the-scenes stories to come out of a major studio film. Russell had personally gone to producer Andy Vajna and helped secure the financing that kept the production alive, reportedly somewhere in the neighborhood of $25 million. He had staked his own reputation on getting this movie made. So when the studio needed someone to steer the ship after Jarre's firing, they turned to Russell. Russell said yes to doing the work and no to taking the credit. He didn't want to be known publicly as the director. Instead, he proposed an arrangement that sounds almost too strange to be true. Cosmatos would be the public face of the production, the name the crew and the studio answered to on paper. But every night, Russell would meet privately with Cosmatos and hand him a detailed shot list for the next day's filming. The following morning, Cosmatos would step on his set and direct exactly what Russell had planned the evening before. Russell made one condition explicit. As long as Cosmatos was alive, he would never speak publicly about the arrangement. He kept that promise for over a decade. Cosmatos passed away in 2005, and only in 2006 did Russell finally go on record about what had really happened during filming. And notably, it was reportedly Sylvester Stallone who first suggested bringing Cosmatos on board in the first place. This detail matters enormously for understanding Sam Elliott's role in the story, because once you know that the lead actor was quietly running the show, everything else about the production starts to make a different kind of sense, especially the fight that was about to break out over the script itself. Once Russell was effectively steering the film from behind the scenes, he had to make a brutal decision. Jar's original screenplay was gorgeous, but it was also enormous, far too large in scope for the time and money left in the production. So Russell, working with producer James Jacks, began cutting. Roughly 30 pages disappeared from the script. Entire subplots vanished outright. Supporting characters who had significant arcs in Jar's draft, played by actors like Billy Zane and Jason Priestley, were reduced to little more than a handful of lines. Even the film's climactic Earp vendetta ride, a whole extended section of the original story, was compressed down into what amounts to a montage in the finished film. Russell's reasoning wasn't arbitrary. He wanted the film to orbit around one relationship above all others, the friendship between Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday. He would later describe that bond as something like one of the great love stories in film, unconventional and unspoken, but fiercely loyal. To make that relationship the emotional core of the movie, nearly everything else had to be trimmed back to make room. To his credit, Russell didn't spare his own role from the knife. He reportedly pushed to give away his own lines to other cast members, insisting the film shouldn't feel like a one-man showcase. Val Kilmer, for his part, apparently told Russell he could cut as much of Doc Holliday's dialogue as he wanted. Kilmer was confident he'd steal every scene regardless, with nothing more than a look and a drink in his hand. The rest of the ensemble mostly went along with the trims too. Powers Booth, Bill Paxton, and others gave up screen time in the sweltering Arizona heat to help the production limp across the finish line. Almost everyone accepted the cuts as a necessary sacrifice. Almost. Sam Elliott looked at what was happening to Kevin Jar's script and decided he wasn't going along with it, while the rest of the cast were volunteering to lose dialogue, and Kilmer was practically begging to have his part trimmed. Elliott delivered a blunt warning that reportedly became legendary on set. If anyone touched a word of his dialogue, there would be consequences. Whether that line was delivered with a laugh or a glare probably depended on who you ask. But underneath the gruffness was something completely sincere, and it's the key to understanding what Elliott actually understood about this production that most audiences never piece together. Elliott wasn't being difficult for the sake of it. He had read Kevin Jar's original, unedited screenplay, and by his own account, it was one of the finest scripts he had ever come across. In interviews given around the time the film was released, Elliott said, as much directly, that the original screenplay was, in his estimation, one of the best he had ever read, full stop. And then he said something that should stop any serious Tombstone fan in their tracks. If he had been handed the script in the trimmed-down form that eventually became the finished film, he would have turned the project down entirely. Sit with that for a second. The actor whose performance as Virgil Earp is still remembered as one of the emotional anchors of the film has said, in essentially his own words, that the version audiences actually watched was a diminished version of the story he fell in love with. He felt the cuts had stripped out what he considered the connective tissue of the film. The character work, the quieter scenes, the roughly 30 pages that gave the Earp family story its texture and depth. There's a very personal reason this stung Elliott more than most. Virgil's character was one of the ones hit hardest by the trims. In Jar's original vision, Virgil was positioned as the true moral center of the Earp family, the older brother whose sense of justice is what ultimately pushes the others to strap their guns back on. Much of the material that built Virgil into a fully realized three-dimensional man was exactly the kind of slower, character-driven scene that gets sacrificed when a production needs to move faster and spend less. So when Elliott drew his line and refused to give up his remaining dialogue, he wasn't defending vanity. He was defending the last surviving pieces of a character and a story he believed in completely. That tension between Russell's instinct to streamline the film into something tight and emotionally direct, and Elliott's determination to preserve as much of Jar's original, sprawling vision as possible, runs underneath every frame of the finished movie, even if most viewers have no idea it's there. What makes this story genuinely haunting is that Sam Elliott wasn't alone in believing something extraordinary had been lost. Kurt Russell, the very person responsible for the cuts, has spent decades wrestling with the same feeling. In that same interview, where Russell finally revealed the truth about directing the film, he made a striking comparison. He said Kevin Jar's original version of the story was essentially a Western Godfather, a sprawling crime family epic transplanted to the 1880s. Stephen Lang, who played Ike Clanton, has echoed a similar sentiment, describing Jar's original script in almost the same terms. A Godfather-level piece of writing set in Frontier, Arizona. Think about the weight of that claim. The people who actually made Tombstone, the ones who lived through its chaotic production, believe that somewhere inside all that footage was a film on the level of one of the greatest movies ever made, and that circumstance, not talent, is the only reason it never reached the screen. That regret hasn't faded with time. Decades after the film's release, Russell has continued to say, in various interviews over the years, that he's never fully made peace with how the production unfolded, and that the film could have been something even greater than what audiences got. This is a man attached to a movie widely regarded as one of the best Westerns ever made, and he still can't fully separate that success from the sense of what was left on the cutting room floor. And here's the detail that keeps this story alive for fans. Much of the unused footage may still exist. Russell has said he ended up with the original raw material shot during production, meaning there could be hours of unseen footage sitting in storage somewhere. For years, fans have hoped for a true director's cut, a reconstruction that restores Jar's fuller vision, the Godfather version of Tombstone. Russell has occasionally hinted he might revisit the project, going back through his old notes and drafts, even mentioning a specific unfilmed scene between Wyatt and Doc that was meant to close out the story. But as of now, it remains just that, a hint, not a release. The bigger, richer Tombstone that Sam Elliott fought to protect is still sitting somewhere, unfinished and unseen. Once you understand how fragile this whole production really was, it becomes clear just how many small decisions could have wiped out the Tombstone we know entirely. Start with the casting of Doc Holliday. The role that turned Val Kilmer into a legend and gave the film its most quoted line was originally envisioned for a different actor, Willem Dafoe. The deal fell apart largely because of studio nerves. Disney, which was backing the film, was still wary of the backlash surrounding Dafoe's earlier role in The Last Temptation of Christ and passed on casting him. That single decision is the only reason the part went to Kilmer. The what-ifs go even further. At one point, producer Annie Vagina floated a wildly different pairing to Kurt Russell, asking whether Russell might be interested in playing Doc Holliday instead, with Richard Gere stepping into the role of Wyatt Earp. It's almost impossible to imagine now, but for a moment, an entirely different version of this film's central chemistry was on the table. Then there was the outside pressure. At the same time Tombstone was being filmed, director Kevin Costner was working on his own competing Wyatt Earp movie. Costner had reportedly been offered the Tombstone project first and had been loosely involved with Jar's development process before splitting off to make his own version. According to accounts from people involved with Tombstone's production, Costner used his industry clout to make things difficult for the rival film, reportedly attempting to influence distribution and financing decisions, and even trying to buy up authentic period costumes to keep them out of Tombstone's hands, forcing the production to source wardrobe from overseas instead. It's a strange footnote in film history. Two competing Wyatt Earp movies, made at the same time, with one allegedly trying to sabotage the other before either had even reached theaters. Tombstone survived all of it anyway. When Tombstone finally hit theaters in December of 1993, it defied every expectation surrounding it. It went on to earn well over $70 million at the box office, making it one of the most successful westerns of the modern era. Costner's competing Earp film, by contrast, was widely seen as slower and more bloated, and it underperformed by comparison. The leaner, faster version of the Wyatt Earp story won out. That's the great irony sitting at the heart of this entire story. The same cuts that devastated Sam Elliott, the trims that he believed had gutted the emotional depth of the film, may be exactly what made Tombstone work as a piece of popular entertainment. Russell's instinct to strip the story down to its essential core, the bond between Wyatt and Doc, gave audiences something fast, quotable, and endlessly rewatchable. The film became a cult classic in large part because it moved like a bullet rather than lingering like an epic. So who was actually right? Sam Elliott, who fought to preserve Jar's sprawling, richly detailed original vision, or Kurt Russell, who cut it down to something tighter and more commercially viable? The honest answer is that they both were. The Tombstone audiences actually got as tight, propulsive, and unforgettable a film that never lets you check the time, and that's a direct result of Russell's ruthless editing. Without those cuts, there's a real chance the film either never gets finished at all or limps into theaters as an overstuffed mess nobody remembers today. But the version that got left behind, the one that haunted both Russell and Elliott for decades afterward, might have been something even rarer, a genuine large-scale masterpiece, a Western built with the depth and ambition of a story like The Godfather. That's what Sam Elliott was trying to protect when he refused to give up his lines. He had held Jar's original screenplay in his hands. He had read the connective tissue before it was cut away, the quiet character beats, the slower, more human scenes that let these larger-than-life figures breathe between gunfights. He understood exactly what was written on those missing pages, and he understood that once they were gone, there was no getting them back. That's the secret at the center of Tombstone that most fans never fully grasp. The movie you love isn't a finished, untouched masterpiece. It's the surviving wreckage of something even bigger, held together by a lead actor who was secretly steering the entire production, and an ensemble cast willing to sacrifice their own screen time to keep the film alive. Every unforgettable line that made it into the final cut is, in a very real sense, a survivor. And somewhere, tucked away in old film reels or forgotten notes, the rest of that story is still waiting. Sam Elliott didn't just play Virgil Earp. He was the one person on that set who looked at what was being lost and refused to stay silent about it. He fought for the words on the page, and in doing so, he fought for the soul of Kevin Jar's original vision. And in the process, he left behind one of the most quietly remarkable stories in Hollywood history. The story of how the greatest Western of its era is also, by the account of the people who made it, one of the greatest films that never fully got the chance to exist.